Yeah.
Right. There we go. Hello, everyone. We are now officially live. I am joined here by Jeff Noon and Steve Beard, the authors of Gogmagog, which has literally just come out at the start of this month, I believe. I'm terrible with dates. And obviously, this interview is to talk to you both about you guys as authors, the writing process for this book, and obviously writing together, because as I mentioned to Steve backstage, I haven't actually spoken to any authors so far who have written a book together, so it's really, really interesting actually. So let's just start on the basics, and if I don't know who wants to go first, but if either of you would like to go first and just kind of give a brief overview about yourself, and yeah, just maybe past works.
I will begin. So I'm Jeff. I'm Jeff Noon. I've been writing for 31 years now. My first book, Vert, came out in 1993. I've been writing ever since, on and off, and surviving. And here I am. And I've got a new book out with Steve, which is brilliant.
Hello, my name is Steve Beard. I'm the co-author of Gogmagog. The first book that I had published in 1999 was a science fiction novel called Digital Leatherette. Jeff came to one of the readings that took place in the Sussex Arts Centre in Brighton all those years ago, and made a point of introducing himself, and we've been firm friends ever since. Got quite used to kicking around ideas together, got quite used to kind of writing all sorts of things together, an experimental novel called Mapaloojo, lots of different film scripts, and finally we hit on writing a fantasy novel together, Gogmagog.
Amazing. So I have read Vert from Jeff. I read the re-released novel that Angry Robot published, which I thought was actually really, really interesting. It's something that I'd never read before in that kind of vein, in the sense that obviously it's a dystopian Manchester, which for a start, I've never seen anyone write about a dystopian Manchester, which was quite cool. And then obviously the premise is that everyone takes vert feathers. It's been a long day, and the different colors mean different things. I thought that was really interesting. How did you come up with that idea?
Oh God. Well, I mean, to me, it's not a dystopian Manchester. It's just the Manchester I was living in, slightly exaggerated. Okay. So that was written in the rave era, when everyone was taking ecstasy, and I was going to. I never took ecstasy, but I used to go to clubs and friends' houses and watch them take it. And I don't know, this idea just popped into my head that I should do this novel about these group of people and what they're getting up to and the adventures they have on the street. And it's a novel that kind of just wrote itself in a mad rush of words in 1993. It was put out by a tiny publisher, and it's very much a first novel to me. It's just filled with all the massed ideas of 15 years of frustration, and of rejection slips, etc. So it's all in there. And because it was put out by a small publisher, I didn't really think that much about it. I didn't think it would have any life. So because of that, I was very free to just write what I wanted to write without any fear, anything like that, and just trying to capture the feel of Manchester at the time. Lots of people that have read that book that were around at the time have said how true it is to the era,
Okay. And Steve, how did you find, unfortunately, I haven't read your first novel, but how did you find writing your book? Obviously, you guys have published in the 90s, and obviously you're publishing now as well. What are the differences really between then and now?
Well, let me say first how I kind of deepened. How I had a connection with Jeff before I met him, because of course I had read Vert. In the 90s, I was working as a journalist on a style magazine called ID,
right?
And I was a book reviewer. So I used to, as you know, Chelsea, used to get a lot of books sent to me, some of which I would find appealing, others that I wouldn't. Now I was a big I've been a big science fiction fan since my teenage years, mainly the kind of the new wave material from the 60s, J.G. Ballard and Michael Moorcock and so on. But my interest in science fiction had been reinvigorated by the cyberpunk moment of the early 1980s. Obviously, figures like William Gibson and Bruce Sterling, and Gibson's development of a kind of neo-noir, pulpy language for writing about the connections between big corporations, personal computers, and conspiracy theory really struck a nerve. But it was all very American, and at that point, I thought in the towards the early 90s, almost like 10 years after Gibson had published Neuromancer, I thought, well, how come no one's written an English cyberpunk novel? That's really something that needs to be written. Maybe I should write that. And then a copy of Vert arrived in my pigeonhole at work. Damn.
Someone's written it.
Well, me and my friends used to meet in pubs, and we would discuss that question. Why is there no English cyberpunk? And I didn't know that in a few years' time I would actually be writing that stuff and putting it out there. So, but initially, the first novels, they often happen very accidentally. A lot of stuff goes on in your life, and suddenly you've got an opportunity and you just go for it. I'm of that generation, like Steve, that when we read Neuromancer for the first time, we were just blown away by it. A big book for our generation.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. So with obviously publishing back in the 90s and just kind of getting into your first book, obviously, Jeff, you've just said that writing Vert because you didn't expect it to necessarily go anywhere and find and felt more free writing it. When you both moved on to your next novels, did you already notice a pickup in your previous books, or did you still have that kind of free sense of writing? When did that change?
Writing careers when you're at our level are not like straight up and straight down. They're very wavy, and you can be in troughs, you can have peaks, and you've just got to know how to ride the trough. Basically, that's the key to surviving. So you never know if a book's going to take off, if it's going to have readers. And I put books out that I haven't found readers, and the books that have, and that's just the way it is. We're not in the career where we've got a steady state of fans that are going to read the books. It's a constant struggle. No matter how old you might get, there is that constant struggle that goes on to find new ideas and to find publishers. And I'm very lucky to have found in the second half of my career. Not many people have second halves of their careers. A publisher like Angry Robot that have supported me for a good number of books now, and I was very lucky to find them.
That's good. Obviously, you've just mentioned first and second halves. Steve, do you feel like you've got like a first half and a second half? Is that something else that you share?
I have many first halves and many second halves. Those kinds of writers, I'm afraid. I probably haven't done myself any favors by sort of jumping promiscuously from one genre to another. So I started off, as I said, writing a science fiction novel, Digital Leatherette, wrote a follow-up. But then also wrote an artist's book for Bookworks, then got into writing experimental fiction. So just had something published a few years ago by MIT Press in their unidentified narrative object imprint. So really science fiction and fantasy for me haven't been of interest as a genre which leads to a stable writing career. It's been much more of an interest in terms of here's a space where you can do some interesting thinking and where you can take a certain number of contained risks. That's what's really attracted me to fantasy. But there are other sort of micro genres like the artist's book or experimental literature or theory fiction, as it's called, where the same kind of thing's possible, but you don't really get the kinds of popular audiences that I think Jeff has tended to have in his career.
Steve and I are basically a giant brain meets a man whose blood is made of words. And that's why we work together quite well, I think, you know. I mean, I just riff off Steve's mad ideas. He's got an incredible range of ideas, and he's always surprising me with them. And I'm just a storyteller. I mean, that's what I do. I want to tell stories. I'm interested vaguely in experimental ideas, but really at heart, when it comes down to it, I am the storyteller, you know. So I think that's part of our relationship as a team.
That's amazing though, because having two halves obviously make a better whole. And if you find a way to connect and bounce off each other, that's got to really help your process. So with obviously Steve's ideas and your storytelling weaving, do you have a standard process before you guys wrote Gogmagog and you're just bouncing ideas off each other? Was there a process, or is it just a more of a casual, like you sit down and have a conversation, that kind of thing?
No, there is a process. Yeah. Steve, do you want to talk about Mapaloojo?
Well, no. Before I talk about Mapaloojo, I just want to jump in and say that Jeff's being a bit modest when he says that I'm throwing all these ideas around and he's just sitting there trying to extract a story. I mean, the reality is that you know, Jeff comes up with the most brilliant ideas. And I think we tend to enjoy brainstorming together if we're writing something quite experimental novel like Mapaloojo, which I was perhaps a little bit more comfortable with,
right?
Did half the writing for. But then Gogmagog, you know, entirely written by Jeff after we brainstormed ideas together,
Right.
but then closely collaborated on the writing of individual chapters in terms of shaping them before Jeff wrote them and then editing them after they'd been written. So I think there is a sense in which our collaboration has shifted, because the first novel we wrote, Mapaloojo, was game-like in the sense that it had some rules. So Jeff would write one chapter and develop the arc of a story which we kind of had in mind together. These crazy characters living in a fictional world called Lujo. So hence the title Mapaloojo. The novel is a kind of map of this fantasy city.
Yeah.
Send that chapter to me and then I develop it and send it back to him. So it's very much kind of, we were kind of swapping chapters to each other on an alternate basis. And then obviously there was a lot of thinking in between about how the story would develop. There was a lot of editing work that Jeff did at the end of that process to make the novel cohesive. So that was how we started to collaborate, and we just developed that method of collaboration for Gogmagog in just a bit of a different way, trying to take advantage of each other's strengths.
Yeah, so Gogmagog starts from the initial idea we had was to do a TV series about some psychic detectives in London. Believe it or not, this is how ideas migrate over time. That was a long time ago, more than 5 years ago. That was abandoned. We then thought, okay, well, let's make up our own version of London.
Okay.
Like a fantasy version of London, and then we'll be free to express all these ideas that we've got in this fantasy world. And that gave us a certain amount of freedom then that we could explore. And over time, we started to build up the concept of Ludwig, not thinking of it necessarily as a novel. It's been through many different ideas and concepts, you know, and there was no story to it at the beginning. I've got hundreds of files in my Gogmagog document, and the follow-up Luda that go back, as I say, like 5 years is the earliest one.
Wow.
And then we'd invented, we've got, I mean, timelines of the city going back to Stone Age times. We've got lots of different tribes. Each tribe has got a different religion, a different magic system. We've got rules of social behavior. We've got place. I've just got a list of place names, you know, that we just made up.
Yeah.
But there's no story there yet. And so it's quite unusual, this. We basically invented the city, Ludwig, first. And then we found a story. And Steve was the initial kind of spark of that story.
Okay. And did that story actually start with Katie? Because obviously our main character is Katie Arcadia Mead.
No, I mean, Steve just said he was interested in doing a version of the Heart of Darkness, Conrad's Heart. We both love Conrad, Heart of Darkness, but set on the Thames and journeying upriver through London. And I just said to him, well, that actually sounds like a Ludwig novel. Let's do a river journey.
Yeah.
And once we'd come up with that, then the story on all this material that we've got, it all started to come together. And because it's a journey upriver through the city, you get to the city in the second book, by the way. It enables us to gradually build up this world in the reader's mind, bit by bit, as the boat travels up the river. It enables us to give the reader little bits of this world through the events as they unfold, rather than telling them the whole world at once. So it really came together with that simple idea. Cady was, we needed a captain for the ship, and Cady arrived, basically.
That's really cool. Yeah, I think that the way that you have created this novel with the idea of the river journey, and that's how you learn more information, that for me as a reader is quite beneficial. There are obviously fantasy books out there that do what we call info dumping, where you just kind of start within the first 100 pages, you get so much information that you're expected to just remember. And obviously that's quite difficult, especially when it's so fantastical and with new names and species and magic systems, that the idea of actually spreading it out over a journey is a lot more digestible, actually, as a reader. And I don't know about you both, but that's definitely how I enjoy reading my books.
Same for me, absolutely. Yeah. If Cady can see it, or if she can think about it, the reader will know it. Otherwise, they won't know it. So, Cady she's not a first-person novel, but Cady is the intense focus of the storytelling.
Yeah, the skeleton genre sitting inside that fantasy genre is really the picaresque novel. It's a story based on a journey with stopping off points. So, a river is a kind of classic vehicle for thinking about that journey. Yes. Obviously, that picaresque novel's been updated in lots of interesting ways in the last 20, 30 years. Ian Sinclair, writing his book about traveling around the M25 orbital motorway, for example, has a picaresque feel to it. But we wanted to do something a bit more classic, I think. As Jeff said, there was the connection with Conrad's Heart of Darkness, where the protagonist was voyaging up a river in a thinly disguised version of the Congo. But we wanted to do something which was much closer to home.
Right.
But at the same time, we wanted to have a liberty of exoticizing and making strange the realities of English life in the post-World War II period, and sort of travel through the looking glass of England, if you like, which is again plays to one of Jeff's great strengths in terms of his interest in Lewis Carroll.
Okay, is that a big influence for yourself then, Jeff?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. It's he's with me all the time. Alice, I mean, to this day I'm still writing Alice in some way. Never leave her behind.
That's pretty amazing. I mean, my other half absolutely adores Alice in Wonderland. I don't know exactly what it is that he loves about it. Mainly probably how much tea they drink. He's a very big tea drinker, but he loves that idea of portal fantasy. Essentially, is probably what it is.
In the second book, Ludluda, coming out later this year, there is our version of a mad tea party, and that again, that's an idea that we took and we had lots of ideas. I mean, we fantasized about writing, and it's kind of there in its skeletal form. It's still there. So a lot of the that idea of journeying through a strange world and learning stuff about that world, just like Alice does, and then coming back out and bringing those lessons of the strangeness with you into your reality again. That's just a constant in my novels. My characters are always getting trapped in strange realms. In Gogmagog, the strange realm is the ghost of a dragon, for instance. So there are two kind of realities. The book starts in post-war reality, and then enters after a certain number of chapters into a haunted space, basically.
Mm-hmm. How did you both come up with the Katie character? Because obviously she is not necessarily a traditional protagonist. I know we're not in her head, but she is our main focal point. She is obviously an older woman. She's portrayed as being in like her 70s, 80s, and she is crude to say the least, which I greatly enjoyed about her, if I'm honest. So
Yeah.
how did the idea of, obviously you had the world and you built that up first, how did Katie come about?
I think for me that it starts with one detail, which is that I was doing a bit of research about bargemen working on the Thames in the Victorian era when I was, researching this book, and they used to get up really early in the morning at like 4 a.m. and their breakfast would be a glass of vinegar with a raw egg in it. And I just thought, I need Katie to wake up in the morning and drink a glass of vinegar with a raw egg in it.
Yeah.
And that was literally the starting point. There was very little beyond that. We wanted to do someone who was old, and she's 78 in the novel. She's actually a lot older than that, you find out, but she's 78 as far as we know. We wanted someone who was, I mean, Steve can talk about this, but we went back to look at female characters in the post-war era in popular culture, and also mainly it was always looking at the female comic actors, British,
right,
that we used to really laugh at and enjoy in the 60s and 70s when we were younger. And they were quite blousy, quite bawdy. They didn't suffer fools gladly. They could be quite sweary and so on. And it was just a kind of subgenre of the female character back then. So we took that and then ran with it. But yeah, it all starts from the glass of vinegar with an egg in it for me.
And let's also not forget, though, Chelsea, that fantasy as a genre has a very close match with ancient mythology. But one of the strands that did feed into the shaping, not just of Katie, but other female characters in the novel, is that Celtic mythology around the three different roles that a woman can adopt: the maiden, the mother, and the crone.
Yep.
We thought, well, the maiden, that's a stock figure of romance, really. The mother tends to kind of produce a different kind of novel, maybe a kind of a novel of middle class manners or something. A novel about the crone, about the really ancient woman who's actually not a mother. It's kind of interesting. Let's do something with that. And we paired her actually with a young 10, 11-year-old girl who was, exactly, yes, very much kind of identified with the classic kind of quest narrative that you find in ancient mythology and also in fantasy stories.
Yeah, I like how in the beginning as well, obviously we're introduced to Katie and we're introduced to the other characters slowly as we go through. But I did enjoy watching the relationship between Katie and young Bryn, who at the beginning Katie's a bit like, oh, she's foisted on me essentially, and then throughout the novel she kind of comes to care about this young girl who is going through something that she doesn't understand, and she can't help to begin with because no one will tell her what's going on. And then obviously it develops from there. And I think that's a really interesting relationship to build as well. Was that always the plan, to kind of make that relationship grow? Or was that just something that kind of came from the story?
Everything comes from the story. I mean, although we planned this novel out quite, we had like a 12-page synopsis, I think. We would often like divert from it, but we had that in mind. But it was very bare bones, and a lot of the, even some of the big things like the Ghost of the Dragon wasn't in at the beginning when we set off on this journey, So yeah, so I think like with Katie and Bryn, it's just like I have always loved boat narratives because they're like people are just trapped in this tiny space. There's only 4 people on this boat to begin with, so. It's great fun then to just set Katie up against the two passengers. One is Bryn, a 12-year-old, 10-year-old, and the other one is a thrall, which is a kind of mechanical man called Lek. And both of those relationships with for Katie are very problematic, and she has lots of arguments with Lek.
Yes, yes, she does.
Yeah, and I think basically with Katie, I wanted to do something that she was just really struggled with life, but she's a fighter and a survivor, but she's so desperate to live, and she's got this secret mission, and it's killing her, and it's just too much, and she's bound herself up with all this armor over the years to protect herself. You know, she's quite a lonely character, and so when Bryn comes along and opens up that other side to her, and then we start to see that crack open, and this more tender side come out. You know, I mean, that's the basically that's what we were looking at in terms of mapping their two character psychologists together.
And I think the advantage of having those relationships developed within a vessel, Juniper, as it's called in Gogmagog, is that it functions as a kind of hothouse environment. Emotions can accelerate and swing very wildly and evolve rapidly. So it's actually quite possible to touch the extremes of human emotion, maybe, and psychological change within that contained environment.
Okay, so I agree. I think having the smaller vessel is a really good place to kind of almost like push characters together. They have to interact, they have to find a way, whether they like it or not, they have to find a way to just kind of exist in this space with these other people, and obviously just kind of still go about their day, which is quite interesting. And I think as well it's quite nice as well to see other relationships Katie had with like Yanish.
Sure.
Obviously at the start of the book she mentions, we're told as readers how she's rescued Yanish, and that's kind of, for me as the reader, was kind of the start of being like, okay, she's not completely grouchy. She does have a soft side. She's looked after this boy, and then obviously as things progress, she kind of seems to feel as though he's betrayed her in some way, when she finds out more about him being on the Juniper. And that was really interesting to see as well, just all of her emotions. She's not really a muted emotion feeler. A lot of her emotions are just really big, which I really enjoyed. How do you go about when you're planning the novel? How do you go about not necessarily planning for every character element, because that's probably not possible, but kind of breaking down each character to kind of get their like mannerisms? How do you go about that?
But before you answer that, Jeff, I'll just say one thing further about the fact that the characters were on a boat, that's a contained environment, but it's very different from characters being in a room.
Yes.
Because on a boat, people have jobs, you know.
Well, this is true. Yes.
People have to do things, and that's one of the lessons I think we took away from novels that are about sailing or the challenges of piloting a vessel down a river. African Queen, Moby Dick, is actually the attention to the specifics of the tasks that need to be done: piloting, navigating, captaining. And the status that's attached to that, and then the kind of psychological demands that are made as a result of that certainly played a part in sort of framing character development. Sorry, Jeff, I know you were into this.
That's all right. Don't worry about it, man. For me, character goes back to two words, two opposites, which is warrior poet, and this is where I start all my characters with this concept. By that I mean that in life we fight, and then we write a poem, and then we write a poem about the fight. And by that, when I say fight, I mean any kind of battle or trouble that a human being can have, from the smallest spat at work up to an actual fight on the battlefield. And then we write a poem. By a poem, I mean that we reflect upon that. We make a joke of it. We tell an anecdote, or we actually write a poem or a novel, you know. And so if you look at the way that the characters go about their business, they're often swinging between these two modes. And Katie's classic for that, because she often has these big struggles, and then she gets very kind of romantic after it, about, you know, what she's been through, and how she's going to react to it. And so that very simple idea for me, those two opposites, the warrior poet, is what I always keep in mind when I'm creating characters for the first time. You know, let them fight, yes, because you need conflict, but let them be poets of the soul as well. Don't, you know what I mean? And just, you can then, the two can feed into each other. There's a passage in the book where Cady, right in the middle of a battle, you get this giant list of everything that Cady's been through in life, all of her illnesses, all of her miscarriages, her relationships, her doomed marriages, all these strange and, you know, revolutions and wars, etc. And then it's in the middle of a fight, and I when I read that bit, I just think, well, that's, you know, that's it. She's fighting, but look, life, you know, the celebration of life within the battle. And I think that if you can create that for all your characters and then put them all together in that contained situation, that becomes increasingly more dangerous as the book goes on. You know, those characters are going to fight against each other, but they're also going to react in more and more romantic ways as well, and more tender, and you know, their attitudes to each other must change all the time as they carry on. So they're not static. You know, they're growing up. Two of them are growing up. That's a fact. Yanis and Bryn are both on the journey of life at different stages. They are. And then, you know, and then you've got Cady, who's, I mean, I can't say too much about what's happened to Cady, but, you know, she's going through massive changes in her life that she's completely and utterly shocked by, because it wasn't something she expected. So it's just that, you know, you create these characters, you let them go, you give them a life, you let them be who they want to be, control them when they need to be controlled, but otherwise just let them go and let them enjoy each other's company. Even when they're arguing with each other, let them enjoy the argument.
And then of course there's the cantankerous robot Lek, slowly disintegrating as a result of his various injuries. There's a line of development or degeneration maybe there.
I mean, in Lud Luda, Lek is just, I mean, my God, wait till you read that. I mean, what happens to Lek in that is just ridiculous, you know. But this is just how me and Steve work, because it's almost like we're trying to astonish each other in a way. You know, we're just trying to come up with more and more. And often we will say things like, oh, you know, what if we make her pregnant? Oh, really? Yeah, well, why not? You know, and suddenly something comes out of that it's actually quite interesting, because we're just throwing these ideas at each other all the time, and it never ends. It never ends, you know. And we wrote this book week by week. We would meet on a Monday in a cafe. We would work out the next chapter in quite some detail, and I would take notes. And I would go away and I would write that chapter quickly, and I can write quickly, not worrying too much about it. And I'd usually take, say, 4 or 5 days on that, send it to Steve. Steve will send me some notes back. I would adjust the chapter, and then on the next Monday we'd do the next chapter. So the whole thing is building up in a very kind of organic way. We have got our roadmap of the synopsis, so we can always go back to that. But this book was written chapter by chapter. Me being fed ideas and being told off by Steve, and, you know, adjusting to that, and, you know, trying to tell this story together, basically. Steve, you have that phrase that you gave me, the third mind, which I always liked it, that idea.
Yeah, that's an idea that comes from William Burroughs when he was collaborating with the artist Brian Geisen in the 50s and 60s. And it's the idea that when two creative people come together to collaborate on a project, whether it's a novel or a film script, or perhaps even a painting, thinking about Warhol and Basquiat, the mark of a deep collaboration is that from the two minds that come together, there develops what Brian Geisen called a third mind.
Right.
And that third mind almost sort of hovers above the two minds that have got their heads together and become this shared space. I guess as a metaphor, it's almost like a kind of the cloud or a computer server. You can both reach there, almost find the same ideas sometimes. So it's quite good that sometimes when we're batting ideas around, yes, we do try to challenge each other and astonish each other, but also the opposite happens. Sometimes we both have the same idea almost simultaneously, and it's the first one to say the idea who then slightly shocks the other one because they're thinking, no, I just had that idea, why are you saying?
I thought of that. That's amazing. Does that happen often? Obviously, if you guys have you've collaborated on a couple of things, probably more than a couple, does that happen often? By the sounds of it, but having the same idea.
Yeah, I think so. I think we're always hovering around the same concept in a way, especially as the story goes on, because as the story goes on, obviously it's getting, the pathway of the story is starting to focus more and more and more. So by the time you're like halfway through a book, you've really got in your shared mind an idea of where this story needs to go in order to bring it to a satisfying fruition, and so obviously, so at the beginning you're more kind of loose and what should we do, let's do this, let's try that, and then later on it just narrows down until the juniper is just journeying down that pathway and it cannot do anything else but journey down that pathway, and at that point we kind of both know what needs to happen, and we do everything in our power to make it happen.
That's really cool. How do you find working with someone else? Obviously, you guys seem very tight knit, really good friends. I'm guessing that. Well, I'd like to guess that adds to your collaboration, because you seem to know each other so well.
I think for me, the 3 novels we've written together, the slightly more experimental novel Mapalujo, the novel that we're talking about now, Gogmagog, and the follow-up that's coming out in November, Blood Luda, these for me are all really developments of my friendship with Jeff. So I think even if we weren't writing together, we'd still be sitting in a cafe quite regularly, talking and batting ideas around and having thoughts. And in a way, the kind of novels have been almost like an organic outgrowth of that kind of friendship. And I think that's what's been most important to me, is that if the friendship wasn't there, I'm not sure that I'd be that interested in collaborating with another writer. Do you know what I mean? If that's presented to me as an opportunity, or you can collaborate with William Gibson or something, okay, great, but I don't really know the guy and I'm not that happy with him, so no, not really.
So the friendship really helps bring you guys together.
That's the kind of foundation of it.
Oh, that's so lovely. Obviously Gogmagog, like we keep mentioning, has got a sequel. Did you always plan for it to be a duology? Was there ever a different plan?
Yes, it was going to be one book. We were going to take the juniper. Half of the book was going to be on the river, half in the city. We very quickly realized that we had too much story, basically, for that to happen. Then we started to think of it as a trilogy, and then we knocked it back to 2 books, which I think is the correct length for this particular story, definitely. It probably would have been too thin for 3 books, but it's just right, I think. And now that meant that we could, on this first book, just concentrate on that part of the world to the east of the city. In London terms, from the estuary up the Thames to the city. That's what it is, and I think that works quite well for us. So because then we come to the second book where we're actually entering Ludwich, we're still keeping to the river, and we are going to go beyond the river, beyond the city, continue to the river. This is a river journey. But it's just a very different feel when you can get off and go around some streets and, visit different areas of the world. rather than being stuck on the boat all the time. So the two books have different feels to them because of that.
But that sounds like it would be a really good development as well, because obviously you've got your base knowledge that we've gathered in Gogmagog, and then we're expanding that even further in Ludluda, which I think I'm looking forward to reading the sequel. It sounds like it's going to be a really good time. How did you come up, or did you organically come up with these titles? Obviously, Gogmagog is mentioned within the first book. Was that all? Once you wrote that, or once you came up with that idea, was that like, that needs to be a title?
I can't remember where we decided on that. Gogmagog is mentioned in the very first history of England, which is by Geoffrey of Monmouth, 1136, I think he wrote it. He didn't have a lot of knowledge of history, obviously, at that time. So the things that he didn't know about, he would make it up. And he has this founding myth of England, which is that this guy called Brutus comes over from the Trojan Wars and defeats this giant called Gogmagog. And so when he gets to Britain, he finds that it's actually being run by a race of giants, and he has to defeat them. So I thought, I just thought that's a really interesting idea, and that we could take that and do something with it. So I think the word Gogmagog just arrived out of us talking about Geoffrey of Monmouth, I think, and then we didn't really know what it was. And I can't even remember the moment when it suddenly became the name of the antagonistic demonic figure in the novel. But it just did. It was one of those accidents, I think.
Yeah.
I think we had other names for it. I've got a list of names. I was looking at them before. There's lists of names for the Faina that are completely different. There's tons of stuff. And I think it's an interesting point, this, because we wanted to write a book that did relate to Britain, but was in some way a sideways look at it. And so just being able to share that fantastical founding myth in a different way was a really good starting point. And you can see how from that simple idea, that Brutus arrives and there's giants. Now they arrive and there's lizards, giant like dinosaurs, and from that, these two completely different strands of history emerge. In one of them, the capital city is called Ludwig, and in the other strand, the capital city is called London. In the second book, we just tease out a little bit more about that. But throughout the book, there are tiny little things that connect Ludwig to London. Like the most obvious one is probably John Dee, who was a historical figure who lived in London, a magician. Steve's a bit of an expert on him, so a lot of that comes from Steve. So there is this tiny little connection between the two, but it's just like teasing out the linkages. I refer to it as a kind of bleed through, where the two dimensions rub together.
Yeah, just to add to that, Gogmagog, this is the name of the original dragon inhabitant of the country of which Ludwig is the capital city, a country called Kethra. And Kethra is very much our view of England through the looking glass. And as I said before, once you're in that fantasy space, you can begin to think about how that maps onto ancient mythology. If you think about mythologies of peoples or nations, mythologies of planets in science fiction, there's an origin story. I mean, an origin story is really important to the whole mythology of the superhero, let's not forget. And then there's an end point story as well.
Right.
You think about the superheroes, you think about Avengers Endgame or something, and often that ending is a scene of judgment, is an apocalypse. But I'm interested in the origin story for Gogmagog, the first novel in the duology. And yes, Geoffrey of Monmouth, the ancient giants were the first original inhabitants of Britain, and we thought, well, in our version of Britain, maybe those giants are actually dragons. So that's a kind of a way of rethinking the sort of the dragon motif from classic fantasy, thinking about the dragon as almost an indigenous inhabitant of a country, almost like the Native Americans in a way in the US. And then, of course, once you're there, you can begin to think, oh, yeah, but then there were dinosaurs, so that's kind of interesting. So what can we do with that? So you start to sort of play around with that idea once you're in that fantasy space and see how you can grab hold of something from myth and begin to twist it and turn it and update it and push it in parallel directions. And then Ludluda, the follow-up novel, we felt we needed to have a title that rhymed with Gogmagog in terms of repetition, Gog and Gog, Lud and Lud. Yeah. We wanted to have a mythical reference as well with Ludluda. So just as Gogmagog is one of the original mythological inhabitants of Britain in the Geoffrey of Monmouth story about Britain, King Lud is a central kind of mythological king that's mentioned by Geoffrey of Monmouth, and is thought to be one of the first, or at least one of the most significant of the primary kings of London and England. So we thought, well, let's try and do something with that name and try and make something interesting out of it to rhyme with Gogmagog. But you have to wait for the second novel to find out.
They're both splits of male and female names as well. So Gog and Magog. Sometimes those are written separately.
Yeah.
And Lud and Luda are male brother and sister, early brothers and sisters of our origin myth. So it kind of works in that sense as well.
Oh, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
So obviously we've spoken about how you came about your process of writing this book. Was there a hardest part to write this book?
Well, I wrote an entire chapter that Steve didn't like, and it
I can imagine that's quite difficult.
I had to throw it away because we had what I call the number one rule. Okay, so just to finish off that process, so I would write it, and then Steve would send me notes, and sometimes these were very extensive notes. Sometimes he just said great, but often it would be like this, and this, and that I came up with this idea of this number one rule, which.
Oh, is he gone?
Oh, we might have lost Jeff.
Oh dear. Well, I know what he's going to say.
Right.
The number one rule, which Jeff kind of invented for himself, I think. Oh, you there, Jeff?
We're back.
Yeah, I'm back. Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah, the number one rule, Jeff, you were saying.
Yep.
Yeah. Oh, it's the number one rule. Yeah, I always do what Steve says. That was my number one rule. So, So, and that creates this idea of the third mind. So it's just it's a way of like me getting rid of all that ego stuff and then just letting this thing happen. I create this basic raw material. Steve looks at it, tells him what to do, and I do it. And then we move on. So we're constantly moving on. We're not focusing on it and trying to make it right or anything like that. I create. He sends me notes. I do the notes, or bang and on. You see what I mean? So, and I think that using that, it enabled us to create the first draft quite quickly, and it was very rough and very, I needed a lot of work, and then we both worked on that to start perfecting it and making it better, but it worked well. I think that for me, certainly.
Yeah, idea. I mean, what Jeff's describing is a process. So this was in many ways a process-led cultural artifact that we created. And in the sense that it was a novel, it was a process that was very much like a game, much like our first collaborative novel, Mapalucho, was. It was a game that had rules that were often arbitrary. So in a way, this number one rule that Jeff's mentioned, that he would do whatever I said, was a kind of arbitrary rule in a way. It could quite have easily have been the other way round.
Right.
And I think the connection there is with the French Utopians like Georges Perec, who challenged himself to write a novel without the letter E. There's this idea that arbitrary rules placed around creation were a kind of a constraint, similar to the constraints we were talking about before in terms of story, the constraint of the confines of the vessel that can actually squeeze more sparks out of the imagination.
Yeah. That's really interesting, actually.
Yeah, so to answer your original question, yeah, there were
Yeah.
some chapters that Steve just didn't like at all, and I rewrote them. We just got, I just did it, you know. I mean, luckily, I love to write, so there's no problem.
And you're still friends after writing these books, so that's
Exactly.
amazing.
Well, no, Jeff did say to me, I just think you're in a bad mood that day, weren't you, Steve?
And I just go back to the dragon subject, if I can.
Of course you can.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so now this is the first time I've ever spoken about this, but there's a technique I use. It's called the scale of invention. Every word I've ever written is using it, and in very basic space that is shared ideas, and then a space above it that is unique ideas, and then imagine a borderline between them where unique and shared ideas are kind of intermingling. Okay, so shared ideas is this. Most of our lives we live in this shared idea space, whether it's political ideas, religious ideas, you know, if you like crime novels, you're in that shared idea space. There's all those tropes are in there, and it's the same, especially true of fantasy. So then, I call that the society of ideas. Above it, and it's aspirational, that's why it's above it, there is this unique idea space, which is the individual idea. So if you then take a classic shared idea from the fantasy world, which is the dragon, and then just work with Steve on this, working hard on it, to just push that up into the unique space. So instead of a dragon, we have got a dragon, but it died a long time ago, and its ghost is haunting the river. And the ghost is 60 miles long, you see. So that's taking that shared ideas, pushing it up into the unique space, but it's actually living on the borderline between the spaces. If you imagine a wavy line, dipping in and out, shared, unique, shared, unique, shared, unique.
Yeah.
And I think that is a really great space to concentrate on when you're writing, because it's vibrant then, you know, because the idea is, oh, I'm shared. Oh, I know what that is. Oh, what's that? Oh, that's different. Oh, I know what this is. That's different, and so on. And I think that's really exciting. And when I read books or watch films, if I'm reacting strongly, I often think, oh, that's in that shared, unique borderline, you know. So I think the dragon, the ghost of the dragon is a classic use of that technique. In the writing process. And often we would get ideas and I would say to Steve, oh, well, you know, let's push that into level 2 and see what happens, you know. So it's a very useful, conscious technique to make sure that your work is embodied within that beautiful shared folk culture, but has also got a unique voice within that culture.
Wow, that's really interesting. I've never heard of that before. Is that something that you have created?
I invented it. It's the first time I've ever mentioned it to anyone. So apart from Steve, you know.
I feel very privileged. Thank you very much. That's such a great.
Well, I'm actually writing a book at the moment, which has got a lot of these techniques that I've invented over the years in it. Even though it is a novel, it's a novel about. It's a science fiction novel, but teaches how to write a science fiction novel. So I'm finally, because Steve often says to me, Jeff, you should do a how to write book, you know. I don't want that. But now I've found a way of writing a novel that actually can contain this information in a very interesting way. So I've been thinking about it a lot.
That's incredible. Do you know what? I think if they taught that to me at school when we did creative writing, it would make so much more sense.
It's a very simple idea, and it's, as I say, it's conscious. You consciously think about it and try to get into that space. It doesn't happen accidentally. That's a fact.
Yeah.
You know, and it takes work, but when it works, you know, and it doesn't work all the time, but when it does, it's very, very rewarding, I think.
Well, yeah, because there's obviously, like you mentioned, in fantasy, which is predominantly where I read my books, fantasy and sci-fi, there are a lot of tropes and things that if a book mentions that it has a dragon, or you're reading from a sci-fi pilot or something like that, that kind of trope, I'm invested. I really enjoy those books. So. But the ones that I love are the ones that do those tropes, but a little bit differently to what everyone else is doing. So that's really interesting, actually. I think I'm going to think about that now. So I've got both my copies of Gogmagog next to me. I was showing Steve earlier. Obviously, I'm very lucky. I've been sent a finished copy and an ARC as well. did you guys have any input in the cover designs for these ones, or is that?
No, it was kind of done. We were very happy with it because it's great to have to use a term, a real artist doing it rather than a digital process of some kind.
Yeah,
it was fantastic to have someone who actually drew those images, and they pick up very well on the kind of what are we talking about? Peak.
Mervyn Peak.
Mervyn Peak, yeah, they pick up on that world, which is quite interesting, I think, in terms of the mood. I mean, we haven't even spoken much about, the actual period of this novel in 1947 and what that means, but I think those covers capture that really well.
Yeah.
That kind of post-war crumbly kind of texture,
Yeah. I really do like these covers. I was saying to Jeff earlier, because I've got the arc and the finished, it almost, hang on, where's my camera? There it is. It's almost as if, so for the arc, so on the back of the finished copy, if we can, back of the arc, I should say, obviously these are the finished copies for the two books, Gogmagog and Ludluda, and it's almost as if with the idea of the arc and the finished copy, the arc is more of the what looks like to be the Ludluda cover, and then obviously we've got the Gogmagog cover. So I think that's a really nice touch as well, how they work together.
Yeah, they form a complete picture altogether.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's a really, really good idea and a really nice touch as well. I'm looking forward to seeing the finished copy of Ludluda as well. I love the colours as well that you guys have used, and the slight dragon in the background. I think it all ties in really, really nicely. It's nice to see that your book has got a cover that reflects its insides, if that makes sense.
It's good that you noticed the dragon in the background, because not everybody does. Well done.
Oh, thank you. I have spent some time staring at it. They're very, very pretty. But those are pretty much all of my questions. Thank you so much for talking to me. Is there anything else that you feel you need to tell us about Gogmagog? Obviously, it's already out. You can go and purchase it now anywhere that you purchase books. It's published by Angry Robot, and this is the finished cover, if anyone was wondering. It is very, very pretty. And then the sequel comes out in November, which
I think it's December now. December, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Okay. All right.
Fair enough. That's exciting. So are you excited for, obviously, are you doing anything else to promote? Obviously, we've got a Instagram tour with Angry Robot happening at the minute. I am part of that. My tour stop for that is tomorrow. So I need to post my picture tomorrow. But is there anything else you guys are doing to promote the book?
No, not really. This is
No?
I think this is the only one we're doing, I think, up to now. Yeah. I mean, okay. I think it's I'm just happy that people seem to be people have been responding to this book very well, and I'm really happy that that's the thing. It's been a hell of a journey. We've just handed in yesterday the final draft of Ludluda, so I had to read through it, and I thought, okay, yeah, this works, and so I'm very excited for people to read that one. Actually, there's some things in it that I think people are gonna, let's say there are some things in that are so firmly on that borderline between shared and unique.
Very excited. It sounds like it's going to be a great sequel. Well, in a few months' time, if you want to come back on and do another interview, now you've done it once, we can talk about the sequel and all sorts of spoilers if you so wish. That's obviously always an option. I thank you for spending an hour of your evening with me. I hope you have enjoyed it. And thank you for your answers. I feel like a lot of the answers that you've got, especially for this book, the way that you write and your processes that you've explained, I really appreciate how in detail and researched everything you do is. It's really fascinating, actually.
Thanks. It's been a pleasure speaking, so.
That's all right. Anytime.
Well, thanks for having us, Chelsea. Appreciate it.
That's completely fine. Do you want to plug yourselves, where people can find you? I'm not sure if you've got websites or anything like that.
Not
that you
really.
can
I mean,
direct
just
people to.
at Twitter is probably at Jeff Noon on Twitter is probably the best for me. That's where
Okay.
most things. Yeah.
You can catch me on Substack at Bad Faith Healings.
Nice. Sounds like a band.
That's good.
That is good, yeah. Fantastic. Well, to anyone who's watching this live or watching it in catch up, thank you very much for joining us for this interview. This has been an interview with Steve Beard and Jeff Noon, talking about obviously their writing journeys and Gogmagog, their newest release together. Like I said, you can buy it pretty much anywhere that you can purchase books. It's published by Angry Robot, so it will be on their website as well. So definitely go and check it out. I've really enjoyed it. It's definitely something I haven't read in a while. I really like the different elements that you guys have woven into the story. It's fantastic. But that's everything from me. If it's everything from you, then we'll end this stream here, and I will let you get back to your evenings.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for joining. See you later, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.